without further ado, Nemo.
That serves me right for not submitting a little bio thing that they asked for. I get what I'm given. Right, so it's pretty self-explanatory what we're going to be talking about. Why arguing is pointless and how to do it if you have to. Because I'm known to be a little bit argumentative. Is that all right on the camera? Yeah, cool, fine. All right, so I do wander around a bit, so I'm probably going to wander out of my own frame at some point. So I want you to sit back and imagine the last time you had a difficult conversation about the church with someone. Just close your eyes, just think about it for a moment. When was the last time you had a difficult conversation? And I want you to think about how successful that conversation was, perhaps, to your own point of view. Just take a moment there. I'm going to say 99% of these conversations fail. If the positive outcome is that, the other person comes to your way of thinking, if that's what you're trying to achieve, they fail. But I will warn you that 100% of statistics in this presentation are made up. So I wouldn't take it too seriously. Right, that is Jonathan Haidt, whose work I have shamelessly stolen for my presentation. We're going to be looking at his idea of the elephant and the rider as a model of psychological sort of analysis of ourselves. So he puts it out there that there is an elephant, which is the emotional part of your brain and the emotional part of your reasoning, and there is the rider on top, the logical part. Of course, this wouldn't be a Mormon-themed conference without realizing that it's actually a man sat atop a tapir, or a horse, depending on your proclivity. And just to really embolden that point, that is a period-accurate rider of a tapir. So we're gonna take the elephant and rider model. We're gonna call it the tapir and the rider. Tapirs are just as stubborn as elephants, just as rideable as elephants, as you see, just as adorable, and they have a little trunk too. So for all intents and purposes, you could say elephants, tapirs, same thing, right? Just in case you can't find any elephants in an archaeological record anywhere. So some people got it, yeah, cool. So the rider is the logical part of the brain, as I said, and change is tricky. And so is convincing a tapir, because what happens with all of us when we're having thoughts, having conversations, when we're working our way through life, we essentially are sat atop our emotional reasoning, and it is charging forward, taking the most direct, the most easy path through all things. We make shortcut after shortcut after shortcut in our thinking. And what the rider, the logical part of your brain, which is much newer, sits nearer the front of the brain, much newer in our biological evolution, what that does is it ends up shouting apologies to the people that have been trampled on the way past often, and spends a lot of its time justifying the actions of the tapir. So this tapir is charging along, they get up to a good speed, and you're left looking at the wake and going, oh, okay, I did that because, I did this because. Think of the last time you made quite an emotional decision, and then afterwards you find yourself sort of justifying it. And if you really sit and think about your thoughts, you often find yourself beforehand thinking, if I had to explain this to someone, how would I do it? And once you can justify it to this imaginary person in the future, then you'll get along and do it. It'll be fine. So that's kind of what we experienced. There was a test done. It comes from Jonathan Haidt's book. He talks about a test that was done whereby people were doing a maths quiz. And one group were told that no one would mark their papers and they would get points for every question they answered regardless, but still try and answer them. Another group were told that that the papers would be marked, and they were all allowed to cheat. The amount of people that cheated when they knew that no one was going to check their answers was massive. The amount of people that cheated when they thought they'd have to justify to someone, much smaller. Because really, we're more concerned about appearing right than actually being right. That emotional part of us wants to appear right, and then we engage the logical part of our brain to justify ourselves to the outside world as being correct. We're then going to move to Daniel Kahneman, who in his book Thinking Fast and Slow kind of pushes forward on this a little bit more. I had a little bit of a read the other night, but Julian recommended it to me, and he'll be very upset if I don't ever actually read it. But tapirs are useful. He posits that the emotional part of our brain is very useful and takes up a lot less energy. The reason, if you want to go into the biology of it, people have argued that the reason human beings are far less muscular than other apes is because we've got a much bigger brain, and brains take a lot of energy. Something like 25% of the calories you consume in a day go to fueling this. So, it's very energy intensive to think, to do things, to logic your way through stuff. And so if you can make shortcuts in that logic, it saves you energy, it saves you time. So he gives an example of a bat and a ball. So I'm going to ask you all a question. And he gives this example from his book. So there's a bat and a ball, and together they cost £1 and 10 pence. The bat costs £1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Answers. Oh no, hang on. Yeah, 5 pence, right? Because then the bat has to cost 105 and then you get the 110. That is the emotional part of your brain going, don't worry about this logic, I've got it. It seems simple, it seems easy, I'm just going to assert an answer. And then the logical part of your brain steps in and goes, no, you're not qualified. You're not qualified to be dealing with this. Tapirs aren't qualified to deal in what the objective truth of the world is. They're qualified to deal with how we feel about things. But the problem is they're far more powerful, they're far more stubborn, they do a lot more of the lifting work in our brains. Because can you imagine how exhausting it would be every time you came to something like the bat and the ball scenario, where you could actually just take the shortcut and you didn't, and you sat and worked every little thing out all the time? How exhausting that would be to be in that headspace constantly. I know, because it's basically what I make my living doing, and it is tiring as anything, and I have to switch off sometimes and just sit and watch television or something. Because it is tiring analysing every little thing that's in front of you. So they're not very qualified to deal in matters of truth. And now the word truth can be a bit contentious in Mormonism. What do we mean by truth? We don't mean what the brethren mean by truth, which is whatever we tell you. We're talking about actual objective reality here, and tapirs aren't very useful for that. So I want to ask you all a question again. How do you think the church handled their finances when it comes to the SEC? Just shout some answers out. When it comes to we all know about the fine the church received? Yeah, fraudulently. Okay, any other? Oversight, okay. Well, okay, do you consider the matter closed? You do, okay.
I don't understand sorry, can you explain what?
So the church was fined $5 million by the Security and Exchange Commission in America for not properly filing their taxes and creating shell companies and whatnot. So they did bad things. But the question, any of you who are familiar with this have got a bit of a gut reaction to it, right? You see that and you go, oh, okay, yeah, the church is bad. But we have to ask ourselves honestly, have we read all the documents? Have we read the 9-page SEC order? Have we read the church's response? Have we read all those things, right? A lot of people in this room will have, but a lot of people won't, particularly the members, the believing members that we talk to, because really the question they're answering is, how do I feel about the LDS Church? That's the emotional shortcut we make. It's not about the SEC, it's not about the facts, it's not about the logic behind, did they do something technically wrong, yes or no? When you confront someone with that question, it's how they're questioning how the LDS Church is, they're questioning how I should feel about the LDS Church, I want to defend it, so I'm going to say the church did nothing wrong. And they won't want to even begin to engage with the fact, because what we all naturally do, is we make that emotional assertion and then we spend all the time using the logical part of our brain to then defend that position that we've already decided on. And it takes a lot to sit back, as Zelf on the Shelf were talking about last night, to sit back and go, well, that's the story I've been telling myself. That story is emotionally generated. How do I now maybe take a step back and decide that I'm not going to be in with that story, I'm not going to engage with that story, I'm going to move on and do something else. I'm going to change my mind. But if you are going to argue, right, because sometimes you have to, and if you are going to have these difficult conversations and you want them to be successful, there are some rules of engagement we need to kind of look at, which by and large are the ways in which we can maybe determine a good conversation from a bad one. What I would say is, I'll go back if I can, there you go. Well, the first thing I would say is establish what the point of the conversation is. Because we've just seen that actually emotionally, it's a conversation about, do you like the church, do you not? Do you believe the church, do you not? Do you believe Russell Nelson's a prophet? What's that got to do with whether the church filed their taxes properly? But that's what it becomes about. So if you're going to have these conversations, stick to the topic. Define a point, don't make it too big, but make sure that you and the other individual are clear on what it is. I've had 3-hour-long conversations with priesthood leaders because all I'm doing is bringing them back to the point. Yeah, but how's your faith? What? That's not what we're talking about here. Hang on. We're very much talking about the fact that the church leaders need to be held accountable for what they've done. Not, oh, but how do you feel about him as a prophet? I'm like, well, clearly by the evidence, not great. So let's not go on to my feelings. We're going to keep talking about fact. That's the first thing I'd want you all to kind of take away from this, is if you're going to have a difficult conversation like this, they will naturally run away and you'll get taken on tangents and you'll go this place and that place. And that is done by people often because they can't deal with what you're presenting them with. So they want to take it to a place where that emotional reasoning has full control, they've got all the answers, they're safe there, they know that terrain. Testimony of the Book of Mormon is a great one. Yeah, but I have a testimony of the Book of Mormon. That's the common response. And the Book of Mormon had nothing to do with the conversation we were having. But that's where you retreat to because that's the safe place for that person. What we all have as an advantage, no matter where we are on the faith spectrum, because this isn't just how to argue for anti-Mormons, right? Or ex-Mormons or post-Mormons or whatever you want to label yourself as. This is anyone dealing in this space. This is how to have these conversations, no matter what position you come from. You find a common language, and we all have a common language. We have the language of the gospel, we have the words, we know what these words mean, we share common definitions. And again, making sure that we all know what we mean when we say faith, we all know what we mean when we say believe. You know, when was the last time someone got up in fast and testimony meeting and said, I know X, Y, and Z? Let's have a quick conversation about what it means to know something, just so we're on the same page. Do you actually mean I believe something? Yes, I that's actually more accurately how I feel. Okay, so we're having a conversation about belief. And then you've got that common language, you know what you're both talking about there. That's also useful because with a common language comes some shortcuts that can be made, so you don't have to make logical shortcuts, you can make linguistic shortcuts because you can use what is Mormon shorthand, the thing investigators find very difficult to understand. The other thing you need to do really is turn the tapir, because we've already decided the tapir is in control, right? The tapir is in charge, it knows where it wants to go, and ultimately, if you go to someone and you try and have this logical conversation, if they're not ready, if the tapir is not ready to go down that path, the ride is helpless. The person sat on top, the logical part of your brain, helpless, can't do anything. So you need to speak to the emotions that someone experiences. People aren't being disingenuous when they say, yes, but I feel this way. You say, okay, fine, let's look at why you feel that way. Let's look at whether it's right to feel that way or not, whether I feel that way too anymore, or why I don't feel that way anymore. It's understanding that that is how true change will happen. It won't be because of other things. Now, my notes on here have gone very funny. So this is all off the top of my head, and I'm sure there's some lovely points that I've missed, but I'll be talking to you all a little bit later, so that's fine. Don't argue. I know I said this is like how to argue with people, but really, if it's an argument, you've lost already. It's all gone. Because what arguments do is they enrage the tapir, if we're going to keep on this metaphor. They make it blind and non-submissive, non-compliant, and wanting to just charge ahead through the trees and just go. This is what gets people's emotions really high. It's what shuts down the logical part of their brain the most, is if it becomes a heated argument. One of the ways to do this, and one of the ways to turn the tapir as well, to stop it being an argument, is very much let other people dictate the conversation. Realize that you're not in charge. Like Sam said the other night, we're not in charge of how other people receive us, how they receive what we say. Ask a lot of questions in these sorts of conversations. Okay, so why do you believe that? Not in a challenging way, but just before we go any further, I want to understand why you hold that position. Because if I understand why someone believes what they believe, or why they hold a certain position, then you feel like you're going somewhere together because they feel understood. And it's easier to lead them along in a kind of conversation together, because the goal, the outcome should never be to take someone somewhere where they don't want to be, because that's coercive, not very good. We're not here to, you're not here to convince someone that you're right about everything, because those sorts of conversations are naturally just going to turn into arguments. Because if you're convinced that you're right and there's no room for you to be wrong, then that person's going to switch off. So you can be assertive at times, but you have to understand them, and you have to be willing to be wrong and to learn something from them. Even if you're thoroughly convinced that their position isn't correct, you have to... A way to think about it maybe is that they may have a novel approach to their position. Because say you're an ex-member of the church, just as an example, you're like, well, okay, I understand the reasons why you might believe the Book of Mormon, because I once believed the Book of Mormon. But you don't know why they do. They might have a completely different reason for believing it than you ever did. So there's still things you can learn from them without worrying yourself that you're going to be convinced to their way of thinking, or without getting defensive yourself and thinking, no, my position is fragile, what if they convince me? If you're strong enough in your position, that won't matter, but even if you're not, that's fine, because you understand that they may just have a different way of having had that position. And the final thing I think I'd leave you with, before we kind of get into a bit of a Q&A and we'll discuss some ways in which we should do this, I'm going to bring my volunteer on stage and we'll have some conversation. I'm joking. He looked very scared for a moment though, which was great. Just remember that it will go wrong. It will, because I think Julian told me, we were having a chat the other night, that Daniel Kahneman was on stage having a debate, and the person he was debating with, was it Sam Harris, was it? Yeah. Yeah, so Sam Harris, they were having a chat, yeah. And Sam Harris went, okay, so you must do this all the time now, right? He's like, no, not at all. But you wrote the book on it? Yeah, but I don't. Because ultimately it's how we're wired. It's what's easiest for us. We will keep going and doing it. You'll still have moments where you go, yeah, it's £1, and then you go, oh, hang on. No, it's £1 5p. Yeah, that's right. You'll have those moments where that system of your brain, the tapir, just does stuff. And then you're left to work out why. And as difficult as that is, the more aware you are of it, the easier it can be to understand what's going on around you. So that's my presentation part. There you go, all done. And now I'm just going to, you all right? Yeah, I'm just going to field some questions. I'm always trying to impress Julian, so if he's not impressed, I've not done my job.
Impressed.
Are you impressed? I'm validated. Okay, good.